The end of World War II in 1945 marked a turning point, not just for the world, but especially for the United States. Having emerged as a global superpower, the U.S. was no longer an isolated giant, it was now a leader of the free world. The war had pulled the country out of the Great Depression, reshaped industries, empowered a generation of veterans, and set the stage for new domestic and international challenges. While soldiers returned home to celebration and prosperity, new struggles loomed. A Cold War abroad and a civil rights movement at home. Domestically, the U.S. saw tremendous economic growth in the late 1940s and 1950s. Known as the post-war boom, this era witnessed the rapid expansion of the American middle class. Wartime industries converted to civilian production. Veterans used GI Bill benefits to attend college and buy homes. And suburban neighborhoods like Levittown sprang up seemingly overnight. Baby boomers were born by the millions, and car culture became a way of life. Televisions entered homes, and consumerism defined the American dream. President Harry Truman, who took office after Franklin D. Roosevelt's death in 1945, faced the enormous task of transitioning the nation from wartime to peacetime. Internationally, he oversaw the end of the war in the Pacific by making the controversial decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Domestically, he promoted civil rights, desegregated the military in 1948, and supported New Deal-style policies under what he called the Fair Deal. Meanwhile, the Cold War began to take shape. The Soviet Union, America's wartime ally, quickly turned into its chief rival. The world was now divided between two ideologies: capitalist democracy and communist authoritarianism. In 1947, the Truman Doctrine declared the U.S. would aid countries resisting communism, leading to U.S. involvement in Greece, Turkey, and beyond. The Marshall Plan provided billions in aid to rebuild Western Europe, in part to prevent communist influence from taking root. In 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed, a military alliance aimed at deterring Soviet aggression. Domestically, the Cold War fueled fear and suspicion. The House Un-American Activities Committee and Senator Joseph McCarthy launched aggressive campaigns to root out alleged communists in government, Hollywood, and academia. This Red Scare led to blacklists, careers destroyed, and a national atmosphere of paranoia. Meanwhile, in 1950, the Korean War broke out when North Korea invaded South Korea. The U.S., under the United Nations banner, intervened to stop the spread of communism. The war ended in 1953 with an armistice, but no peace treaty setting the stage for future tensions. In the 1950s, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a World War II hero, became president. His calm leadership helped stabilize the country during the Cold War. Eisenhower invested heavily in infrastructure, including the creation of the interstate highway system, which revolutionized travel and commerce. Despite being a Republican, he maintained many New Deal programs and warned against the growing military-industrial complex in his farewell address. While the nation prospered economically, deep social issues remained unresolved. Chief among them was racial segregation. African Americans had fought in both world wars and contributed to the economy, but they still faced systemic discrimination in housing, education, employment, and public life, especially in the segregated South. This inequality gave rise to the modern civil rights movement. The movement took a defining turn in 1954 with the Supreme Court case, Brown v. Board of Education. In a unanimous decision, the court ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional, overturning the separate but equal doctrine established by Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896. While it was a major legal victory, implementation was slow and met with fierce resistance in many states. In 1955, a seamstress named Rosa Parks was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama, for refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus. Her arrest sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, a year-long protest led by a young pastor named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The boycott ended in a Supreme Court ruling that declared segregation on public buses unconstitutional. King's leadership catapulted him into the national spotlight and laid the groundwork for future activism based on nonviolent protest. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement gained momentum. Sit-ins, freedom rides, marches, and legal challenges confronted injustice across the country. In 1963, the nation watched as King delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, a massive peaceful demonstration attended by over 250,000 people. He called for racial equality, justice, and an end to segregation. But progress came at a high cost. Civil rights activists were beaten, arrested, and even killed. In 1963, civil rights leader Medgar Evers was assassinated in Mississippi. That same year, 4 young black girls were killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. Despite this violence, the movement persisted and made major legislative gains. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson, who took office after the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963, signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 into law. This landmark legislation outlawed discrimination in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. A year later, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, eliminating literacy tests and other barriers that had disenfranchised black voters for decades. Johnson, who declared a war on poverty, also expanded social programs through his Great Society initiative. This included Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, Head Start, and major funding for education and housing. These reforms significantly reduced poverty and improved access to health care and education for millions of Americans. But the nation was deeply divided. While legal segregation was being dismantled, de facto segregation and racial inequality persisted. Urban unrest and police brutality led to riots in cities like Los Angeles, Newark, and Detroit. The civil rights movement itself began to fragment. Groups like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and Black Panther Party began advocating more militant approaches, frustrated with the slow pace of change and ongoing injustice. In foreign policy, the Vietnam War loomed large. The U.S. had gradually increased its involvement in Vietnam since the 1950s to stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. By the mid-1960s, thousands of American troops were being sent to fight a war that would become increasingly unpopular. Protest movements against the war grew rapidly, especially among students, clergy, and civil rights leaders. Many questioned why the U.S. was fighting for freedom abroad while denying basic rights to its own citizens at home. In April 1968, tragedy struck again when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. His death triggered riots in over 100 American cities and left the nation in mourning. Just 2 months later, Robert F. Kennedy, who had become a strong advocate for civil rights and a presidential candidate, was also assassinated. By the end of the 1960s, the optimism of the post-war years had given way to a period of upheaval. The civil rights movement had achieved significant victories, but the struggle for racial equality, economic justice, and peace was far from over. The United States had changed dramatically in just 2 decades, becoming more powerful, more diverse, and more conflicted. As the nation approached the 1970s, it stood at a crossroads facing the consequences of war, political division, and a society still striving to fulfill its founding promise of liberty and justice for all.